One company printed every map Americans trusted, and nobody else could compete. Here's how they locked it down. In 1856, a Scottish immigrant named William Rand walked into a print shop in Chicago with no capital and no connections. By 1900, his company had become so dominant in American mapmaking that competitors didn't bother trying. And here's the trick. It wasn't because Rand McNally had better cartographers or faster presses. It was because they understood something nobody else did. Maps aren't sold, they're distributed. Once you control distribution, you control the market. Exhibit 1, the railroad boom. In the 1880s and 1890s, American railroads were expanding faster than anyone could track. Rand McNally saw the opening. They printed detailed rail maps for railroad companies, then sold those same maps to the public. The railroads paid for the cartography. The public paid for the printing, double revenue from single product. Their cost basis collapsed. Exhibit 2, the automobile. When cars became affordable in the 1900s, Americans suddenly needed street maps. Rand McNally didn't invent the road atlas. They just made sure they printed everyone. They partnered with oil companies. Shell, Standard Oil, Gulf, they all distributed Rand McNally maps at their pumps. Free maps meant more people trusted Rand McNally. Trusted brands print more maps. More maps meant more market share. Here's where the cash actually moved. Rand McNally's real profit center wasn't maps themselves, it was advertising. By the 1920s, they were printing hotel guides, restaurant directories, and city maps, all stuffed with paid listings. A restaurant paid to appear in the Rand McNally guide. That guide sold to travelers. Travelers became customers. The map was the vehicle. The advertising was the revenue. Exhibit 3, the moat they built. By 1930, Rand McNally owned the supply chain. They controlled printing presses. They controlled distribution networks. They controlled relationships with oil companies, hotels, and railroads. A competitor couldn't just print better maps. They'd have to rebuild every single one of those relationships. The switching cost was astronomical. Rand McNally had created what economists call a network effect. The more maps they printed, the more valuable their brand became, the harder it was to replace them. And here's the trick within the trick. They didn't need to innovate, they needed to standardize. Rand McNally created the American road numbering system. US Route 1, US Route 66, those weren't government inventions. They were Rand McNally's system, adopted because Rand McNally's maps were everywhere. Once the system was standard, every map had to follow it. Every competitor had to print the same routes. Rand McNally didn't just sell maps. They sold the language everyone spoke. By 1950, Rand McNally had survived the Depression, 2 world wars, and the birth of commercial aviation. Their maps were in cars, hotels, gas stations, and government offices. They'd printed maps for the military during World War II. They'd mapped territories overseas. Their brand wasn't just American, it was global. And they'd done it without a single patent, without a monopoly in the legal sense, just by being first, staying focused. And understanding that control of distribution beats control of product. The real threat came later, not from competitors, from technology. GPS arrived in the 1990s, smartphones arrived in the 2000s. Suddenly, maps weren't physical objects anymore, they were software. Rand McNally couldn't own the distribution chain for digital maps the way they'd owned it for paper. Google could print a map in seconds. Apple could embed one in a phone. The moat that took 150 years to build collapsed in a decade. But here's what matters. Rand McNally didn't fail because they made bad maps. They failed because the business model changed. For 100 years, they understood that logistics and distribution were worth more than cartography. Then the world shifted and those advantages meant nothing. The company still exists. They still print maps, but they're not dominant anymore. They're a legacy player in a digital world. So what's the lesson? Rand McNally's century of dominance wasn't built on innovation or genius. It was built on understanding the cash flows. They knew that whoever controlled how maps reach people controlled the map market. They knew that distribution beats product. They knew that network effects compound. They executed on those insights for 150 years. And when the underlying technology changed, those insights became liabilities instead of assets. That's how empires are built, and that's how they fall. This video is for educational and informational purposes only and is not financial advice. Always do your own research. Subscribe so you don't miss the next story about how business empires are actually built and why they crumble. This video is for educational and informational purposes only and is not financial advice. Always do your own research.